The gunshot cracked through the desert night like thunder splitting stone. It wasn't the clean sound of a hunter's rifle or the warning shot of a man defending his land. This was different. This was the sound of cruelty given voice, echoing across the mesa and through the canyon walls until even the coyotes fell silent. Clayton Hayes had heard plenty of gunfire in his 38 years. He'd heard it in the war, where bullets sang their terrible songs over trenches filled with dying boys. He'd heard it in saloons where whiskey turned men into fools with iron on their hips. But this sound cutting through the October darkness of 1882 New Mexico territory made him drop his coffee cup and reach for his Winchester before the echo even died. The moon hung pale and accusing above the desert, casting everything in silver and shadow. Clayton stood on his porch listening. The high desert wind carried sounds strange and far, but this was close, too close. Maybe a quarter-mile down the wash, where the old Apache Trail met the newer wagon road. His horses stirred nervously in the corral, ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring at some scent the wind brought them. Then he heard it. A child's scream, high and desperate. "Mama, por favor, mama." Clayton was moving before the words fully registered, grabbing his rifle and medical kit muscle memory from the war taking over. His boots found the familiar path in the darkness, years of solitary living having taught him every rockin' route. The child's cries grew louder, more desperate, mixing Spanish and English in that way frontier children did when terror stripped away language barriers. He crested the small rise that overlooked the wash, and what he saw below made him freeze for just a moment. A woman lay crumpled in the sand, dark hair spread like spilled ink across the pale earth. Blood black in the moonlight seeped from her shoulder. A girl, maybe 7 years old, knelt beside her, small hands pressed against the wound, trying to stop what couldn't be stopped with just the desperate pressure of a child's palms. But it was what Clayton saw next that made his soldier's mind snap to attention. The wound was precise, calculated. The bullet had entered the shoulder at an angle designed to cause maximum pain, but not immediate death. This wasn't attempted murder. This was a message. He slid down the embankment rifle, ready, scanning for threats. The child looked up at his approach, and even in the darkness, he could see her eyes, huge and dark, filled with a terror that reminded him of another child in another place on a night he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. "Please," the girl whispered, switching to English at the sight of him. "Please help her. They hurt my mama." Clayton knelt beside them, setting his rifle within reach. The woman was unconscious, but breathing, her pulse rapid but present under his fingers. The girl watched him with those enormous eyes, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. She wore a simple cotton dress torn at the hem, and her bare feet were bleeding from running across the sharp desert stones. "What's your name, little one?" Clayton asked, his voice gentle as he opened his medical kit. "Sophia," she whispered. "Sophia Morales. This is my mama, Elena." As Clayton worked to stop the bleeding, his fingers found something that made his blood run cold. There, carved into the lead ball he extracted from Elena's shoulder, were 4 letters that gleamed in the moonlight: debt. "Who did this?" he asked Sophia, though part of him already knew. There was only one man in the territory who marked his bullets like that. Only one man who turned violence into a signature. "Senor Thornton's men," Sophia said, her small voice carrying a weight no child's voice should bear. "They came to our house. Mama tried to run, tried to get me away, but they—" She broke off, pressing her face against her mother's chest. Marcus Thornton. The name hit Clayton like a physical blow. 5 years he'd managed to avoid hearing that name. 5 years of hiding in this desert building, his cabin, far from any town, far from anyone who might recognize him as the man who'd once ridden with Thornton's crew, the man who'd done things that still woke him screaming in the night. Elena stirred, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and wild with pain. When she saw Clayton leaning over her, she tried to pull away, tried to shield Sophia with her body despite her injury. "No," she gasped in accented English. "Please no more. We have nothing left. Nothing." "Easy," Clayton said, keeping his voice low and steady the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "I'm not with them. I'm here to help." But Elena's eyes had gone wide with a different kind of fear. Recognition dawned in them, and she whispered something in Spanish that made Sophia gasp. Clayton didn't need a translation. He knew what she'd said. She'd called him by the name he'd tried to bury in this desert along with his past. "The angel of death," she whispered in English, now her voice thick with pain and terror. "You're Thornton's angel of death." The wind picked up, sending dust devils spinning across the wash. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote began to howl, and others joined it, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to mock the pretense of Clayton's attempted redemption. The bullet he held in his palm seemed to grow heavier, those 4 carved letters, debt, reflecting not just Elena's burden, but his own. He looked down at Sophia, at her small hand still pressed against her mother's wound, at the determination in her young face to save the only family she had left. And in that moment, Clayton made a decision that would either damn him completely or finally offer the salvation he'd stopped believing he deserved. He said quietly, meeting Elena's frightened gaze. "But not anymore. And tonight, I'm going to make sure Marcus Thornton never hurts you or your daughter again." The moon continued its slow arc across the desert sky, bearing witness to this moment where 3 broken souls converged in the dust and blood of the frontier. A soldier seeking redemption, a woman marked by violence, and a child who still believed that someone, anyone, might save them. The night was far from over, and the desert had many more secrets to reveal before the sun would rise again over the territory that had no mercy for the weak, no forgiveness for the past, and no promise of tomorrow except what people carved out with their own bloodied hands. The New Mexico Territory in 1882 was a land caught between worlds. The old ways of the Apache and Navajo were fading like smoke signals in the wind, while the new ways of the railroad and the mining companies carved scars across the ancient landscape. It was a place where Mexican families who'd lived on the land for generations found themselves suddenly foreign, where Confederate veterans sought new beginnings alongside freed slaves heading west, where fortunes were made in silver and lost in blood. Clayton Hayes had chosen this harsh edge of the world precisely because it asked no questions and offered no comfort. His cabin sat 15 miles from the nearest town of Perdition, built against a red rock cliff that provided shade in the brutal summers and shelter from the winter winds that came howling down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. He'd constructed it with his own hands over the course of a year, each board and nail a meditation on forgetting each stone in the foundation, a weight to hold down memories that refused to stay buried. The cabin was sparse but solid. A single room with a sleeping area, a stone fireplace that drew properly shelves lined with books he read by lamplight, Virgil Marcus Aurelius books on veterinary medicine and desert botany, things to fill his mind when the ghosts came calling. Outside, a small corral held 3 horses, a bay mare named Clemency, a paint gelding called Sage, and a young Mustang he was breaking wild-caught and nameless still. His well was deep and reliable, fed by an underground spring that had probably been running since before the first humans walked this land. Clayton lived by routine. Dawn meant coffee and checking the horses. Morning was for maintenance, mending fences, tending the small vegetable garden that struggled in the alkaline soil, hunting when meat ran low. Afternoons he'd read or work leather, making tack he'd sell in town once a month for supplies. Evenings were for silence, sitting on his porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of fire before darkness fell like a benediction. He'd been 22 when he'd joined up with Marcus Thornton's crew, fresh from the war, with Confederate dust still on his boots, and nowhere else to go. His family's Tennessee farm was ash, his parents dead from typhoid, His younger sister married off to a carpetbagger. The West had seemed like the answer, then vast and empty enough to swallow a man whole to let him become someone new. Thornton had found him in an El Paso saloon, recognized the particular emptiness in his eyes that marked men who'd seen too much too young. "I'm putting together a crew," Thornton had said, buying him whiskey. Men who understand that civilization is just a word people use when they're trying to take what's yours. For 3 years, Clayton had ridden with Thornton. They'd started as enforcers for the mining companies, keeping claim jumpers at bay, ensuring that workers stayed in line. But Thornton's ambitions grew with his reputation. Soon, they were more than enforcers. They were the threat that kept entire towns compliant, the shadow that fell across the territory whenever someone thought about standing up to the powerful men who were carving up the West for profit. Clayton had been good at it. Too good. He'd earned his nickname not through cruelty, but through cold efficiency. When Thornton needed something done, Clayton did it without hesitation, without emotion. He'd become a ghost of himself, moving through violence like other men move through air. Until that night in Mesilla. Until the family that wasn't supposed to be there. Now, as he carried Elena Morales into his cabin with Sophia clutching his coat, those memories pressed close. He laid Elena on his bed. The first time anyone else had been in this space he'd built as a fortress against the world. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. She was perhaps 30, with the kind of beauty that the desert couldn't quite erase despite its best efforts. High cheekbones, skin the color of coffee, with cream hair that would probably shine like crow feathers when it wasn't matted with blood and dust. But it was the lines around her eyes that told the real story. Lines carved by squinting against the sun, by crying tears that had to be hidden, by smiling when there was little to smile about. "Is she going to die?" Sophia asked in a small voice. The girl stood by the bed, still in her torn dress, her feet leaving bloody prints on the wooden floor. "Not if I can help it," Clayton said, washing his hands in the basin. "But I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Sophia nodded solemnly. In better light, he could see she had her mother's features, but something else too. A steadiness that seemed unusual in a child. Her dark eyes tracked his every movement as he prepared to properly clean and dress Elena's wound. "Have you had any schooling, Sophia?" he asked, trying to distract her as he worked. "Mama teaches me. Reading and numbers. Spanish and English both. She says education is the only thing nobody can take from you." The girl paused, then added quietly, "They took everything else." Clayton's hand stilled for a moment. "Your father, dead 6 months now, in the mine." Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, the way children's voices get when they've had to accept unacceptable things. "Senor Thornton said Papa owed him money. Much money. He said the debt passes to Mama now." As Clayton cleaned the wound, he noticed other things. Older bruises on Elena's arms yellowing at the edges. A scar on her collarbone that looked like it had been made by a belt buckle. The calluses on her hands that spoke of hard labor, probably taking in washing or working in the fields to try to pay off whatever impossible debt Thornton had invented. Elena stirred her eyes, opening slowly. When she saw Clayton leaning over her, she tried to sit up, gasping at the pain. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. You're in my cabin." "Safe?" She laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain it caused. "Nobody is safe from Thornton. You of all people should know that." Her accent was noticeable, but her English was clear-educated even. "You knew who I was. In the wash." "Everyone knows who you are, Senor Hayes, the one who got away, the one Thornton still tells stories about when he's drunk." She studied his face. "They say you killed a family, a woman and her children. They say that's why you left." Clayton's jaw tightened. "They say true. And yet, here you are helping a woman and child." Elena's dark eyes searched his face. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately, focusing on securing the bandage around her shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Because a man can decide to stop being what he was, even if he can't undo what he's done. Thornton doesn't believe that. He says a man's nature is fixed like a brand on cattle. Thornton's wrong about a lot of things. Elena was quiet for a moment, watching as Sophia crept closer to the bed. He'll come for us. He always does. He enjoys it, the hunting, like we're rabbits, and he's a hawk. How much? Clayton asked. The debt. $3,000, plus interest that grows every day. My husband signed papers, Thornton says. I've never seen these papers. She closed her eyes. It doesn't matter. The debt isn't really about money. It's about power, about making examples. Clayton knew she was right. He'd seen Thornton's version of justice enough times. The man didn't want payment. He wanted submission. He wanted fear. Where were you heading when they shot you? Away. Anywhere. I have a cousin in California who wrote that there's work there. I thought if we could just get far enough. She trailed off, the futility of it clear in her voice. Clayton moved to his storage trunk, pulling out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers that would be too big for Elena, but better than her blood-stained dress. He found an old pair of moccasins that might fit Sophia's feet. You'll stay here tonight, both of you. Rest, get your strength back. Then we'll figure out what comes next. We can't stay, Elena protested. They'll track us here. They'll let them come, Clayton said quietly, and something in his tone made Elena fall silent. He stepped outside to give them privacy to change, standing on his porch, looking out at the desert night. The stars were brilliant in the clear air, thousands of points of light that had been shining long before humans brought their petty cruelties to this land, and would continue long after the last grave was dug. He could hear Sophia inside speaking soft Spanish to her mother, helping her change clothes. The domesticity of it, the simple sound of other voices in his cabin, stirred something in him he'd thought was dead. Not hope exactly, but maybe the memory of hope, like the phantom pain from a severed limb. Clayton knew what taking them in meant. It meant the end of his carefully constructed isolation. It meant facing Thornton again, facing the man he'd been. It meant blood, because with Thornton it always meant blood. But as he stood there, listening to a child comfort her wounded mother, he thought about that family in Mesilla. The woman had been trying to shield her children when he'd fired, following Thornton's orders to leave no witnesses. The little boy had been about Sophia's age. The image was burned into his retinas, appearing every time he closed his eyes. He couldn't bring that family back. But maybe, just maybe, he could keep this one alive. When he went back inside, Elena was sitting up in the bed wearing his shirt, which hung loose on her smaller frame. Sophia sat beside her, having changed into the clean clothes, the moccasins fitting well enough. They both watched him with a mixture of wariness and something else, a fragile kind of trust, as delicate as the desert wildflowers that bloomed after the rare rains. There's beans and cornbread, Clayton said, moving to the stove. Nothing fancy, but it's food. Why are you doing this? Elena asked again. You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Clayton ladled beans onto plates, his back to them. Maybe that's exactly why I'm doing it. Because you're strangers who needed help, and I was here to give it. Maybe that's enough. Nothing is ever that simple in the territory, Elena said. No. Clayton agreed, bringing them the food. But sometimes we pretend it is just to remember what it feels like to be human. As they ate in silence, the lamp casting warm light against the cabin walls, Clayton thought about the morning that would come too soon. Thornton would hear about this. The man had eyes and ears everywhere, a network of fear and greed that stretched across the territory like a spider's web. The confrontation was inevitable now, but for tonight, there was a wounded woman and her brave daughter eating beans in his cabin safe for these few hours from the brutal arithmetic of the frontier. It wasn't redemption. It might not even be a beginning, but it was something, and after 5 years of nothing, something felt like everything. The past never stays buried in the desert. Wind and time have a way of exposing what was meant to remain hidden, whether it's bones or memories. That night, as Elena and Sophia slept, the child curled against her mother on the narrow bed. Clayton sat in his chair by the dying fire, and the ghosts came calling as they always did when his defenses were down. It had been January of 1877, 5 years ago, but feeling like yesterday in the clarity of his recall. Mesilla was supposed to be a simple job. A Mexican merchant named Vasquez had been organizing the local farmers, encouraging them to stand against the land grab that Thornton's benefactors were orchestrating. The orders were clear: make an example that would silence any thought of resistance. Clayton could still feel the cold that night, unusual for the territory frost forming on the windows of the small adobe house. Thornton had intelligence that Vasquez would be meeting with the other organizers there. No survivors. Thornton had said, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight like a wolf's. Fear only works if it's complete. But the intelligence had been wrong. Or maybe Vasquez had been warned. Instead of a meeting of revolutionaries, Clayton had burst through that door to find a family at dinner. A woman, her face frozen in the moment between surprise and terror. 3 children, 2 boys, and a girl, the oldest, maybe 10. An elderly woman, probably the grandmother, rosary beads falling from her fingers. Time had seemed to slow the way it did in battle. Clayton had hesitated just for a heartbeat, looking at Thornton for confirmation, but Thornton's face had been stone. No witnesses, he'd said again, and his own gun was already rising. Clayton had done it. That was the truth he carried like shrapnel in his chest. He'd done it because that's what he'd trained himself to be. A weapon that didn't question the hand that wielded it. The family had died quickly, at least. He'd made sure of that, some last vestige of mercy in the machinery of his violence. But quick didn't mean painless, and it didn't mean the images wouldn't replay every night when he closed his eyes. The little girl had looked just like Sophia. He'd left Thornton's crew that very night, rode out without a word, taking nothing but his horse and his guns. Thornton had let him go, which had surprised him then. Now he understood it had been a form of torture more refined than any bullet. Thornton knew that Clayton would carry Mesilla with him forever, that every day of freedom would be its own prison. "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" Elena's voice startled him from his reverie. She was awake, watching him from the bed, her dark eyes understanding in the firelight. "I'm sorry," she continued softly. "I shouldn't have said what I said earlier about the family. It was cruel." "It was true," Clayton replied, his voice rough. "Truth and cruelty often walk hand in hand." She shifted carefully, favoring her wounded shoulder. "May I sit by the fire? I can't seem to get warm." Clayton helped her to the other chair, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Sophia remained, sleeping, her breath deep, and even the resilience of childhood, allowing her rest, even in uncertainty. "Tell me about your husband," Clayton said, surprising himself with the question. Elena stared into the fire for a long moment. "Miguel was complicated. He was a good man when I married him, full of dreams. He was going to strike it rich in the mines, build me a grand house, send Sophia to school in the East." She smiled bitterly. "The territory has a way of poisoning dreams, doesn't it? Turning them into something else." "What happened?" "What always happens. The mine work was harder than he expected, the pay less. The company store took most of it back, charging 3 times what things cost elsewhere. He started drinking, started gambling, thinking one good hand would change everything." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Thornton's men ran the games, of course. They let him win at first, just enough to make him believe. Then they started extending credit." Clayton knew the story. He'd seen it play out dozens of times. It was one of Thornton's favorite schemes. The drinking got worse, and when Miguel drank, he... Elena touched the old scar on her collarbone unconsciously. He became someone else. Or maybe he became who he really was. "I don't know anymore." "Did you love him?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena considered it, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "I was 16 when we married. My father arranged it. Miguel was 25, established or so it seemed. Love wasn't part of the calculation." She paused. "But I tried to love him. For Sophia's sake, I tried very hard. Maybe that's a kind of love, too." "How did he die?" Cave-in at the mine. They said it was an accident, but—" She shrugged, then winced at the movement. Miguel had been talking about organizing the workers demanding better conditions. Men who talk like that tend to have accidents in Thornton's operations. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire pop and settle. Outside, an owl called its voice, carrying across the desert like a question. "Your turn," Elena said. Who was Clayton Hayes before he became the Angel of Death? Clayton was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, like he was reading from someone else's story. "My father was a minister, Presbyterian, strict but fair. He believed in redemption, in the possibility of grace, even for the worst sinners. My mother was gentler, taught school, made sure my sister and I knew our letters and numbers." He paused, lost in memory. "I was 17 when the war came. Father said it was wrong fighting to keep men in chains, but all my friends were joining up, and I thought it would be an adventure. It wasn't. No, it was mud and blood, and boys crying for their mothers while their guts spilled into the Tennessee dirt. I got good at killing because the alternative was dying, and I wasn't ready for that. Turned out I had a talent for it. Steady hands, steady nerves. My captain called me a natural soldier." The words tasted bitter. "When the war ended, I went home to nothing. Father died of a broken heart, mother of typhoid. My sister married a man who'd bought our farm for back taxes. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. So you came west. Like everyone else who didn't fit in the new world, I thought I could start over, be someone different. But Thornton saw what I really was the moment he met me. A killer. Dressed it up in pretty words. Enforcer, regulator, peacekeeper. But we both knew what I was." Elena reached across the space between them, her fingers briefly touching his hand. "What you were, not what you are. Well, how can you say that you know what I've done? I know you could have ridden past that wash tonight. I know you could have left us to die. I know you're risking everything you've built here by taking us in." She withdrew her hand, but the warmth lingered. "A man is more than his worst moments, Senor Hayes." "Clayton," he said. "Just Clayton." "Clayton." She tested the name, her accent softening the edges. "Tell me about the family, the one in Mesilla." He'd never spoken about it to anyone. But something about the darkness, about Elena's quiet presence, made the words come. "The grandmother died praying. In Spanish. I don't know what she said, but I know she was asking God to forgive us. The mother tried to shield the children, threw herself in front of them. The little girl, she had a doll, cloth with yarn for hair. She was holding it when—" He couldn't finish. "And you see them." It wasn't a question. "Every night, sometimes during the day, too. They're just there at the edge of my vision. Not angry, just present, watching, waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. Judgment, maybe? Justice. Or maybe they're waiting for me to do something that makes their deaths mean something." He laughed bitterly. "As if anything could." Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, "In my village in Sonora, where I grew up, there was an old woman who said the dead don't want revenge. They want remembrance. They want their stories told, their lives honored. Maybe that's what they're waiting for." How do you honor the lives you took? By saving the ones you can. By being the man that minister's son was supposed to be, even if it comes late. She stood carefully, the blanket still around her shoulders. "I should go back to bed. Sophia will worry if she wakes, and I'm not there." Clayton helped her back to the bed, watched as she settled beside her daughter. Sophia immediately curled into her mother, even in sleep seeking that comfort. "Clayton," Elena whispered from the bed. "What was the little girl's name in Mesilla?" "I don't know. I never asked. I should have asked." "Then we'll call her Esperanza. Hope. Every child deserves a name." Clayton returned to his chair, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he thought about names and stories, about the weight of the past and the possibility of grace. Outside, the desert began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, and somewhere a mockingbird began its morning song running through its repertoire of borrowed voices. He thought about his father's sermons, particularly one about Saul on the road to Damascus, blinded by light and transformed in an instant from persecutor to apostle. But real redemption, Clayton knew, wasn't so dramatic. It came in small moments, in choices made daily to be better than you were the day before. When the sun finally broke the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, Clayton made coffee and started breakfast. Sophia woke first, padding over to him on bare feet. "Senor Clayton," she said quietly, not wanting to wake her mother, "are you a good man or a bad man?" The question in its childish simplicity cut deeper than any accusation. "I'm trying to be a good man," he answered honestly, "but I've done bad things." Sophia considered this with the seriousness only children could muster. Mama says trying is what counts. She says God sees the trying, even when people only see the failing. Your mother is wise. She is, Sophia agreed. Then, with a child's rapid change of focus, "Can you teach me to ride a horse?" "If your mother agrees." "She will. She wants me to know everything, to be ready for everything." Sophia's face clouded. "She thinks she's going to die. She doesn't say it, but I know. She's been teaching me things faster, like she's running out of time." Clayton knelt down to Sophia's eye level. "Your mother is not going to die. Not while I'm here. Promise." He thought about all the promises he'd broken, all the vows he'd failed to keep. But looking into Sophia's eyes so full of desperate hope, he found himself nodding. "I promise." It was a foolish promise, one he might not be able to keep. Thornton was coming, that was certain, and when he did, all the ghosts of the past would rise with him. But for now, in this morning light, with a brave child looking at him with trust he didn't deserve, Clayton would hold to it. The past was a weight that would never fully lift, but maybe with enough trying, it could be transformed from a chain into an anchor, something that kept you grounded while you rebuilt stone by stone the man you were supposed to be. The third day dawned with a dust storm on the horizon, a brown wall of earth and wind that would hit by afternoon. Clayton knew the signs, the way the air felt charged, how the horses grew restless, the peculiar yellow tinge to the eastern sky. It was the kind of storm that could last hours or days, sealing them inside like a fortress under siege. Elena's fever had broken during the night, and she was sitting up when he brought her coffee. Real coffee he'd been saving for some occasion that never seemed to come. "A storm's coming," he told her, nodding toward the window where the sky was already beginning to darken unnaturally for the morning hour. "I know," she said, wrapping her hands around the tin cup. "I can feel it in my shoulder. The wound aches differently when the pressure changes." Sophia was outside, having insisted on helping with the horses despite Clayton's warnings to stay close. He could see her through the window, talking earnestly to Sage, the paint gelding, who seemed enchanted by the child's attention. "She's never had animals before," Elena said, following his gaze. "In town, we lived in a single room behind the laundry where I worked. The only animals were rats, and the occasional stray dog she'd try to feed with scraps we couldn't spare. She's natural with them. Horses can sense fear, and she shows none. She's had to learn to hide it. Fear makes you weak, and weakness." Elena trailed off, but Clayton understood. Weakness in their world was blood in the water for sharks. "Tell me about California," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "This cousin of yours." Elena's face softened. "Teresa. We grew up together in Sonora. She married an Anglo, a merchant named Patterson. They have a general store in a place called Paso Robles. She writes that there are vineyards there, that the climate is like home, but cooler. She says there's work for anyone willing, that the Anglos there are different, more accepting. You believe that? I believe in the possibility of difference. I have to. For Sophia." She studied him over the rim of her cup. "You could come with us." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected as summer rain. Clayton felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he hadn't realized were there. "I have a life here," he said carefully. "No," Elena corrected gently. "You have an existence here. A life requires living, not just surviving." Before he could respond, Sophia burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Riders!" she gasped. 3 of them coming from the north. Clayton was moving before she finished speaking, rifle in hand, checking the loads. Through the window, he could see them, 3 figures on horseback, still distant, but closing steadily, racing the storm. "Take your mother to the root cellar," he told Sophia, his voice calm but firm. "There are blankets down there, and water. Don't come out until I call for you." "I'm not hiding," Elena said, standing, despite the obvious pain it caused her. "If it's Thornton, it's not." Clayton's eyes narrowed, studying the riders' posture, the way they sat their horses. Thornton's men ride differently. These are cowboys, maybe scouts, but that doesn't mean they're friendly. He helped Elena down the wooden ladder into the root cellar, Sophia following. The space was small but dry, lined with preserves and supplies. "There's a lantern and matches," he told them. "But keep it dark unless you need it." "Clayton," Elena caught his sleeve as he turned to go. "Be careful. We've brought you enough trouble." Trouble was coming anyway, he said. "It always does." He closed the cellar door and moved the rag rug over it, then positioned himself by the window. The riders were closer now, and he could make out details. 2 men and a woman, all armed, but their weapons holstered. Their horses were lathered, pushed hard, and they kept looking back as if something was following. Clayton stepped onto the porch rifle, held casual but ready. The riders pulled up at his fence line, hands visible and empty. "That's close enough," Clayton called out. The lead rider, a weathered man perhaps 40 years old with silver threading through his dark beard, raised both hands. "We mean no harm, friend. Storm caught us out. We're looking for shelter. Plenty of caves in the rocks. Town's 15 miles south. We won't make town before that hits," the woman said, gesturing at the approaching wall of dust. She was young, maybe 25, with sun-bleached hair and intelligent eyes. "And caves won't help if what's following us catches up." "What's following you?" The third rider, barely more than a boy, spoke up. "Apaches. War party, maybe 12 strong. We crossed their sign 2 days ago, been playing cat and mouse since." Clayton studied them. Their story could be true. There had been raids recently, young bucks refusing to accept the reservation life. But it could also be cover for something else. "You're cowboys. Working for the Double Cross Ranch," the bearded man said. "I'm Tom Bennett. This is my daughter Margaret, and that's Will Henley. We were moving cattle to the rail depot when we got separated from the main drive." Clayton had heard of the Double Cross, a legitimate operation run by an Englishman named Worthington. Still, he kept his rifle ready. "You can shelter in the barn. Storm's going to hit hard, but any trouble, and you're back out in it, understand." "More than fair," Bennett said, already dismounting. "We're grateful." As they led their horses to the barn, Clayton noticed how Margaret moved. Confident, competent, checking sight lines and exits like someone used to trouble. Will the young one had the nervous energy of someone running from more than just Apaches. The storm hit just as they got the horses settled. The world outside disappeared in a howling wall of brown dust seeping through every crack and crevice. Clayton lit lanterns in the barn, creating pools of yellow light in the supernatural darkness. "Hell of a storm," Bennett said, settling onto a hay bale. "Seen plenty, but this one's got teeth." "They get worse every year," Clayton replied. "Land's angry about something." "Land's got plenty to be angry about," Margaret said, checking her horse's hooves. "The way folks are tearing it up, looking for silver gold, anything that shines." There was something in her voice, an edge that made Clayton look at her more closely. She met his gaze steadily, unafraid. "You don't talk like a rancher's daughter," he observed. "I wasn't always. I was a teacher once in Austin, but certain circumstances required a change of profession." She said it matter-of-factly, but Will shifted uncomfortably. "Maggie, he doesn't need to know." "It's fine, Will." She turned back to Clayton. "I killed a man who thought a schoolteacher was his property to do with as he pleased. The law disagreed with my interpretation of self-defense, so here I am moving cattle and dodging Apaches in a dust storm." Clayton found himself almost smiling. The territory's full of people running from something. "Including you, I'd wager," Bennett said. "Man doesn't build this far from civilization unless he's got reasons." Before Clayton could respond, a sound cut through the storm's howl. Horses, several of them, and voices shouting to be heard over the wind. Everyone went still, hands moving to weapons. "That's not Apaches," Will whispered. Clayton moved to the barn door, peering through a crack. He could make out shapes in the swirling dust, men dismounting, moving toward his cabin. "Friends of yours?" Bennett asked, suddenly tense. "No friends of mine come calling in weather like this." Clayton made a decision. "Stay here. Keep quiet. This is my problem to handle." "We don't hide from fights," Margaret said, checking her revolver. "This isn't your fight." "Not yet." Clayton looked at each of them. "But if shooting starts, protect yourselves." He slipped out of the barn, using the storm as cover to circle toward his cabin. Through the dust, he could make out 4 men on his porch, one trying to force the door. Even through the storm's chaos, he recognized the bulk of the lead man, Moses Craw Thornton's current second in command. A brutal man who enjoyed his work too much, even for Thornton's loose standards. "Hayes," Craw shouted into the wind. "We know you're here. We know you've got them." Clayton stepped out of the dust like a ghost rifle leveled. "Get off my land, Moses." The men spun guns half drawn before they saw his rifle and froze. Now, Clayton Craw said, his scarred face split in an ugly grin. "No need for unpleasantness. Mr. Thornton just wants his property back. The woman and the girl. Hand them over, and we ride away, no harm done." "They're not property. They're people. People with debts. Legal debts. You know how Mr. Thornton feels about contracts. I know how he feels about a lot of things. None of them good." Craw's expression hardened. "You've been hiding out here playing hermit for 5 years. Why throw it away for some Mexican whore and her brat?" The rifle barrel shifted slightly, aimed now directly at Craw's head. "Choose your next words very carefully, Moses." The wind howled between them, dust devils dancing across the porch. One of Craw's men, nervous, started to move his hand toward his gun. "Don't," Clayton said quietly, but his voice carried even over the storm. "You're not fast enough. None of you are." It was true, and they knew it. They'd all heard the stories about Clayton Hayes, the Angel of Death. How he could put 6 bullets through a playing card at 20 paces. How he'd once killed 3 men in El Paso before the first one hit the ground. "Mr. Thornton's going to be disappointed," Craw said. "He had hopes you'd be reasonable. Professional courtesy and all. Tell Thornton if he wants to discuss this, he can come himself, not send his dogs." Craw's face flushed with anger, but he controlled himself. "You're making a mistake, Hayes. You can't protect them forever. And when you fail, Mr. Thornton will remember that you had a chance to do this easy." "I've made plenty of mistakes. This isn't one of them. Now get out." For a moment, it balanced on a knife's edge. Violence hung in the air thicker than the dust. Then Craw stepped back, motioning to his men. "This isn't over," he said. "You know that. It never is with Thornton." They mounted up and rode into the storm, vanishing like fever dreams. Clayton waited until he was sure they were gone, then went to the root cellar. "It's clear," he called down. Elena emerged, first, dust in her hair, Sophia behind her. "We heard voices," Elena said. "Thornton's men. They're gone. For now." Elena touched his arm. "I'm sorry. We've destroyed your peace." "My peace was an illusion. This was always coming. You just gave it a reason to arrive." From the barn, Bennett and the others emerged, weapons drawn but lowered. "Those weren't Apaches," Bennett observed. "No, different kind of trouble." Clayton looked at them, decision forming. "You folks might want to move on when the storm breaks. This is about to become an unhealthy place to be." Margaret laughed, surprising him. Mister, we just spent 2 days running from Apaches, and now you're facing down what looks like hired killers for folks you barely know. Seems to me you could use some help. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Bennett said. But we've been running from fights our whole lives one way or another. Might be time to stop running and start standing. Will nodded eagerly. Besides, those men looked like they needed shooting. I'm generally in favor of shooting folks who need it. Clayton looked at these strangers thrown together by a storm and circumstance. Then he looked at Elena and Sophia, dust-covered but unbroken. There's going to be blood, he warned. There always is, Elena said quietly. The question is whose? The storm raged on, sealing them all inside this strange bubble of dust and lamplight. 7 souls brought together by chance or fate, or the arbitrary cruelty of the territory. Outside the world was being scoured clean by wind and sand. Inside, something new was being built, fragile as the first walls of a house, but perhaps strong enough to weather what was coming. Clayton began cleaning his rifle, methodical and calm. If you're staying, there are things you need to know about Marcus Thornton. They gathered around, and he began to tell them about the man who would come for them all. The storm howled its fury outside, but inside, in the circle of lamplight, 7 people began to become something more than strangers. They began to become allies, perhaps even friends, in the way that shared danger can forge bonds stronger than years of peaceful acquaintance. And in the root cellar, forgotten in the tension, a small cloth doll lay, where Sophia had dropped it, a doll that looked remarkably like the one a little girl in Mesilla had held 5 years ago. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it rises from the dust, demanding not vengeance, but witness, not justice, but understanding. The storm would pass. Thornton would come. Blood would spill. But for now, in this moment stolen from chaos, there was coffee and conversation, the beginning of trust, and the faint, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, 7 people standing together could face down an empire built on fear. The storm lasted 2 days. 2 days of enforced intimacy of strangers becoming familiar with each other's rhythms and stories. By the time the dust settled and the world emerged scoured and strange, something had shifted fundamentally in Clayton's cabin. It happened on the second night, when the wind had died to a whisper and the dust hung in the air like suspended time. They were all gathered in the main room. Clayton had given up trying to maintain boundaries. Bennett was teaching Sophia a card game, while Will watched, offering terrible advice that made the girl giggle. Margaret was mending a tear in Elena's dress, with precise, efficient stitches. Clayton was cleaning his guns at the table when Elena approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She'd insisted on taking over the cooking despite her injury, and the cabin now smelled of corn tortillas and beans, seasoned with chilies she'd had in her travel bag. "We need to talk," she said quietly, sitting across from him. He set down the revolver he'd been oiling. About what happens when your friends leave, about Sophia and me." She met his eyes directly. "I can't keep running, Clayton. My shoulder won't heal right if I do. And Sophia. She needs stability, even if it's temporary. You can stay as long as you need." "That's not what I'm talking about." Elena glanced at Sophia, who was laughing at something Bennett said. "Thornton won't stop. You know this. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants, or until he's stopped permanently." "I know. So I have a proposition." She took a breath as if steeling herself. "Marry me." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Clayton's hand stilled on the gun parts. "Hear me out," Elena continued quickly. "If we're married, legally married, it changes things. A husband's rights supersede a creditor's in territorial law. Thornton couldn't just take me. He'd have to go through legal channels, and that means exposure he won't want. That's not how Thornton operates, but it's how the territory operates. Even Thornton has to maintain some pretense of legitimacy. He has business partners, political connections. He can't just murder a man's wife in broad daylight without consequences." Clayton was quiet, his mind working through the implications. Across the room, Margaret had stopped sewing, listening without pretending not to. "You don't know me," Clayton said finally. "Not really. I know enough. I know you could have been anything else, but you chose to save us. I know you're haunted by what you've done. I know you're a good man trying to atone for being a bad one." Elena's voice dropped. "And I know you're lonely. So lonely it's like a physical ache you've carried so long you don't even notice it anymore." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. "What about you?" he asked. "You'd be binding yourself to a killer, a man with more blood on his hands than you can imagine." "I'd be binding myself to a protector, someone who understands that the world is cruel but chooses to stand against that cruelty anyway." She paused. "And I'd be giving Sophia a father, something she's never really had, even when Miguel was alive. This is insane. The whole territory is insane. We're just trying to find sanity within madness." Margaret stood up, crossing to them. "She's right, you know, about the legal protection. I saw it work in Austin. A woman married a ranger to escape debt bondage. The creditors couldn't touch her after that." "That's different." "How?" Margaret challenged. "Because you think you don't deserve it, because you've convinced yourself that isolation is penance." Bennett had stopped playing cards, everyone now focused on the conversation. Even Sophia was watching with those two wise eyes. "I'll do it," Bennett said suddenly. "I'm ordained. Did a stint as a traveling preacher before I took up ranching, still legally able to perform marriages in the territory." The room fell silent. Outside, a coyote howled long and mournful. Clayton looked at Elena, really looked at her. The bruises were fading to yellow-green, but her beauty wasn't diminished. If anything, the evidence of survival made her more striking. She met his gaze steadily, unflinching. "You understand what you're asking," he said. "This wouldn't be temporary. Thornton would never let you leave after this. It would be war. It's already war. The only question is whether we fight it alone or together." "Mama," Sophia's small voice cut through the tension. "Are you going to marry Senor Clayton?" Elena held out her hand, and Sophia came to her, climbing into her lap, despite being almost too big for it. "What do you think, mija? Should we—" Sophia studied Clayton with that unnerving intensity children sometimes possess. "Will you teach me to shoot?" The question surprised a laugh out of him. "Your mother would have to agree." "Will you protect us?" "Yes." "Will you leave us?" The question hung in the air. Clayton thought about all the times he'd left. His family's farm, the Confederate Army, Thornton's gang. Always leaving, always running from what he'd done or failed to do. "No," he said, and meant it. "I won't leave." Sophia nodded solemnly, then looked at her mother. "I think you should marry him." Elena smiled, kissing her daughter's head. Then she looked back at Clayton. "Well," he thought about his father, the minister who'd believed in redemption. What would he think of this a marriage born of necessity protection disguised as matrimony? But then he thought about Mary and Joseph, a marriage of protection too, in its way. Sometimes love came first. Sometimes it came after growing in the spaces that commitment created. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll do it." Will whooped, breaking the tension. "A wedding? Never thought I'd see a wedding in the middle of all this trouble." "When?" Elena asked. "Now," Clayton said, standing. "Tonight, before I come to my senses." Bennett grinned. "Well, then let's make it proper. Will you stand as witness for Clayton? Margaret, you stand for Elena." They rearranged the room quickly, pushing furniture back. Elena disappeared into the bedroom, emerging wearing the clean dress Margaret had mended her hair, brushed and pinned up. She'd never looked more beautiful. Clayton thought this woman who'd been beaten and shot and still stood straight. Clayton had no suit, but he put on his cleanest shirt, the one he saved for town visits. Bennett pulled a small worn Bible from his saddlebag. "Dearly beloved," Bennett began, his voice taking on the cadence of ceremony. "We are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words washed over Clayton like water. This couldn't be real. He was standing in his cabin in a dust storm's aftermath, marrying a woman he'd known for days, with cowboys as witnesses and danger pressing in from all sides. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, Bennett continued, and Clayton almost laughed at the irony. But reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Do you, Clayton Hayes, take Elena Morales to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer in sickness and health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? Clayton looked at Elena, at the hope and fear warring in her eyes. I do. Do you, Elena Morales, take Clayton Hayes to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer in sickness and health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. Her voice was strong, certain. The rings? Bennett asked. We don't, Clayton started, but Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It was Miguel's, she said quietly. I kept it to sell if things got desperate enough. She handed it to Clayton, who looked at it for a moment. This ring that had bound her to one man, now binding her to another. The weight of it was more than gold. He slipped it onto her finger, his hand steady despite everything. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you man and wife. Bennett grinned. You may kiss your bride. Clayton hesitated. This was supposed to be protection a legal maneuver, but Elena stepped close, rose up on her toes, and pressed her lips to his. Soft, brief, but real. A promise of something that might grow if given time and tenderness. Sophia clapped, Will whistled, and Margaret wiped at her eyes, though she'd deny it later. Now what? Elena asked softly, still standing close. Now we sign the papers, Bennett said, producing a marriage certificate from his Bible. I always keep a few. Never know when folks might need marrying. They signed, Margaret and Will witnessing. Clayton's signature was firm, Elena's elegant, despite her injured shoulder. And just like that, they were married. Bound by law, if not yet by love, united against whatever storm was coming. We should celebrate, Will declared. Even if it's just with coffee and whatever food we've got. They did gathering around the table, sharing stories and laughter that felt stolen from a world that didn't often allow such things. Sophia fell asleep in Clayton's lap, something that would have seemed impossible days ago. Elena leaned against his shoulder, the weight of her warm and real. You know Thornton will hear about this within days, Margaret said quietly. I'm counting on it, Clayton replied. He'll come with everything he has. Then we'll face it with everything we have. Bennett raised his coffee cup. To the newlyweds, may their union be a fortress against all who would harm them. They toasted with tin cups and chicory coffee this strange family formed by circumstance and choice. Outside, the stars emerged from the clearing, dust brilliant and ancient bearing, witness to this unlikely wedding. This desperate gambit for protection that might, against all odds, become something more. Later, when the others had bedded down in the barn and Sophia was asleep on her pallet by the fire, Clayton and Elena sat together in awkward silence. I'll sleep in the chair, he offered. The bed is big enough for two, she said carefully. We're married now. We should at least maintain appearances. They lay down fully clothed, careful not to touch the space between them, feeling like a chasm and a bridge all at once. Thank you, Elena whispered in the darkness. For what? For saying yes. For giving us a chance. Clayton stared at the ceiling, thinking about chances, about redemption, about the strange turns life took when you stopped trying to control it. Elena, yes, this marriage, I'll honor it. Whatever that means, however it develops, I'll honor it. She found his hand in the darkness, squeezed it once. I know you will. They fell asleep, like that hands touching two wounded souls, bound now by law and necessity, and perhaps, just perhaps, the first tender shoots of something that might one day bloom into love. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and cold, the desert washed clean by the storm. Clayton woke to find Elena already up Sophia, helping her make breakfast despite her injured shoulder. The domesticity of it, the quiet movements, the soft Spanish whispered between mother and daughter, the smell of coffee and tortillas, felt both foreign and achingly familiar. "Good morning, husband," Elena said, and there was something in the way she said it, half teasing, half testing, that made Clayton's chest tighten. "Morning." He accepted the coffee she offered, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. Margaret changed the dressing last night. She has gentle hands for someone who can shoot like that." Through the window, Clayton could see the Bennett party preparing to leave. Their horses were saddled, supplies packed. He knew he should feel relief. Fewer people to protect fewer complications. Instead, he felt an unexpected sense of loss. "They're going," Sophia said quietly, pressing her face to the glass. "I don't want them to go." "Sometimes people have to leave, Misha," Elena said gently. "But that doesn't mean we forget them." Clayton stepped outside, Elena and Sophia following. Bennett was checking his saddle one last time while Margaret and Will loaded the pack horse. "You could stay," Clayton said. "The offer stands." Bennett smiled but shook his head. "We've got cattle to deliver, wages to earn, but something tells me we'll see each other again." Margaret approached Elena, pressing something into her hand. "It's not much, but every bride should have a wedding gift." Elena unwrapped the small package to find a silver hair comb, delicate and beautiful. "I can't. You can, and you will." Margaret hugged her, carefully mindful of the shoulder. "You take care of each other, you hear." Will shuffled over to Clayton, awkward and earnest. "Mr. Hayes, I just wanted to say, what you're doing here, standing up to whoever those men were, it's brave. Stupid maybe, but brave." "Most brave things are stupid, son." As they mounted up, Bennett paused. "Clayton, you need anything at all. You send word to the Double Cross. Mr. Worthington doesn't forget his friends, and after what we've seen here, I'll make sure he knows you're a friend." They rode off, 3 figures against the morning sky, and the cabin felt emptier for their absence. "We need supplies," Elena said, practical as always. "Food, medicine for my shoulder, ammunition if trouble's coming." "I'll go to town tomorrow." "We'll go to town. We're married now. People should see it, know it, make it real in their minds." Clayton looked at her, this woman who understood strategy as well as any general. "That's dangerous, showing yourself in town." "Everything's dangerous now. At least, this is dangerous with purpose." That afternoon, Clayton began teaching Sophia to ride using Sage, the gentlest of his horses. The girl was fearless, laughing as the horse walked in circles around the corral. Elena watched from the porch, mending clothes with her good arm, and Clayton caught her smiling, a real smile that transformed her face. "Higher," Sophia called. "Make him go faster." "First you learn control," Clayton said. "Speed comes after." "That's what Mama says about everything. Control first." "Your mother is wise. She says you're teaching me because you might not always be here." Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, but Clayton heard the question underneath. He stopped the horse, looking up at the child. "I'm not going anywhere, Sophia. I promised, remember. People promise lots of things." The truth of it from a 7-year-old's mouth was sharp. Clayton helped her down from the horse, then knelt to her level. "You're right. People do promise lots of things, but I'm going to tell you something my father told me when I was your age. A man's word is all he really owns. Everything else can be taken, but your word is yours to keep or break. And I'm keeping mine." Sophia studied him with those dark eyes. Then she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tight. Clayton froze, uncertain, before carefully returning the embrace. "I'm glad Mama married you," she whispered. That evening, as they ate dinner, Clayton spread a piece of paper on the table. "If we're making a home here, really making it, we need to plan." "Plan what?" Elena asked. "Improvements. The cabin's solid but small. We could add a room for Sophia, maybe expand the kitchen, put in a proper garden." Elena's eyes brightened. A garden. What would grow here? Beans, squash, corn if we're careful with water. Maybe some peppers. And flowers, Sophia asked hopefully. Mama loves flowers. And flowers, Clayton agreed. They spent the evening sketching plans, dreaming in pencil and possibility. Elena suggested a chicken coop. Fresh eggs would be wonderful. Sophia wanted a swing from the big cottonwood, and Clayton found himself planning a larger corral, maybe even a small barn. This is madness, Elena said at one point laughing. We're planning a future while men are planning our deaths. That's the best time to plan a future, Clayton replied, when someone's trying to take it away. That night, they lay in bed again, still clothed, still careful, but the distance between them had shrunk. Tell me about your mother, Elena said into the darkness. You mentioned she was a teacher. She was. Taught all the county children who could make it to school. She believed education was sacred, that it was the only way to truly free yourself. He paused, memory washing over him. She would have liked you. A woman raising a daughter alone, insisting on education despite everything. What would she think of this marriage? Clayton considered. She was practical when she needed to be. She married my father because her parents arranged it, but they grew to love each other deeply. She'd understand doing what's necessary to protect a child. Is that all this is necessity? The question hung between them. Clayton turned his head to look at her profile in the moonlight. I don't know, he admitted. Is that all it is for you? I don't know either. She turned to face him. But I'd like to find out. It was permission tentative, but real. Clayton reached out his hand, finding hers between them. They fell asleep that way. Hands clasped two people building a bridge across the darkness, one small touch at a time. The next morning brought visitors. Clayton was working on expanding the chicken coop he'd promised when he heard horses. His hand went to his gun, but the riders coming up the trail were moving too slow for trouble. As they got closer, he recognized them. Han Chen, who ran the general store in Perdition, and his wife Mei Li, with their two children, riding double on a gentle mare. Mr. Hayes, Chen called out in his careful English. We heard news. You are married. Word traveled fast in the territory. Clayton helped Mei Li down from her horse. She was carrying a covered basket that smelled of fresh bread. We are, Clayton confirmed as Elena emerged from the cabin, Sophia beside her. Mei Li's face lit up. A wedding, and we were not invited. But she was smiling already, moving toward Elena with the basket. I bring bread and preserves. Every new wife needs help filling her pantry. The children, a boy of 10 and a girl about Sophia's age, immediately gravitated toward Sophia, and soon they were chasing chickens around the yard, their laughter bright in the morning air. You take a risk coming here, Clayton said quietly to Chen. The merchant shrugged. We are Chinese in a white man's town. We know about risk. We also know about standing together when trouble comes. He met Clayton's eyes. Mr. Thornton has made life difficult for many, not just Mexicans. Anyone different, anyone weak. Some of us think maybe it's time someone stood up to him. This isn't your fight. When men like Thornton win, everyone's fight is lost. Chen watched the children playing. My father came here believing in Gold Mountain, in opportunity. I want my children to have that opportunity, not live in fear of men who take what they want because they can. Elena and Mei Li were talking by the garden plot, Mei Li gesturing animatedly about what vegetables grew best in the desert soil. The women switched between English-Spanish and what Clayton thought might be Mandarin, somehow understanding each other perfectly. Your wife, Chen said. She worked at the Garrison Laundry. Yes, my wife says she is a good woman. Hard worker, never complained even when the work was brutal. She is that. And you, Mr. Hayes, you are the one who stopped the Riley gang from burning down our store 2 winters ago. Clayton had forgotten about that. A small thing running off some drunks who thought burning out the Chinese would be amusing. Anyone would have. No, anyone would not have. Most walked by. You stopped. Chen pulled out a small ledger. I have written down what the Morales family owes at my store. The debt Miguel left. Clayton tensed. How much? Chen made a show of studying the ledger, then deliberately tore out the page, ripping it into pieces that scattered in the wind. Strange. I cannot find any record of debt. My bookkeeping must be poor. The gesture hit Clayton unexpectedly hard. Kindness in the territory was so rare, it felt like water in the desert. Thank you, he managed. It is nothing, but Mr. Hayes, you should know. Thornton has been hiring men, gunmen from Texas, some Comancheros from the border. Whatever he plans, it will be soon, and it will be violent. After the Chens left, promising to return, Clayton found Elena in the garden plot, her hands in the soil, despite her healing shoulder. Mei Lee says tomatoes will grow if we shade them properly, she said, and she'll bring me starts from her garden. You're planning quite a future for a woman in danger. Elena stood dusting off her hands. I spent 5 years in danger with Miguel, always waiting for the next blow, the next drunken rage, the next humiliation. This danger, where I can see my enemy, where I have someone standing beside me. This feels like freedom. That afternoon, more visitors came. The widow Harrison, whose ranch bordered Clayton's land to the south, brought a pie and stayed for coffee, pronouncing Elena too good for that hermit. 2 vaqueros who'd known Miguel stopped by, ostensibly to water their horses, but really to see if Elena was safe, if this Anglo was treating her right. They left satisfied, promising to spread the word that Elena Morales, now Hayes, was under protection. As the sun set, Clayton stood on his porch watching Elena and Sophia plant seeds in the garden plot. The cabin that had been his fortress of solitude for 5 years was transforming into something else, a home. The word felt strange in his mind, foreign but not unwelcome. You're thinking too loud, Elena said, coming to stand beside him. I can hear it from the garden. Just wondering what I've gotten myself into. A family, she said simply. Is that so terrible? He looked down at her, this woman who'd been shot and beaten, but still found strength to plant gardens to dream of tomorrow. No, it's not terrible at all. Sophia ran up dirt smudged on her face. Senor Clayton Mama says if we're staying, I should call you something else. What should I call you? The question caught him off guard. What do you want to call me? Sophia considered, then said shyly, Papa. The word hung in the air. Clayton's throat tightened. He'd never thought to be anyone's papa, never thought he deserved that kind of trust. If that's what you want, he managed. Sophia beamed and ran back to the garden. Elena slipped her hand into his. Too fast, she asked. Everything about this is too fast, but maybe that's not wrong. That night, for the first time, they prepared for bed together, naturally without awkwardness. Elena changed into a nightgown Mei Lee had included in her basket, and Clayton found himself mesmerized by the simple domesticity of her brushing out her long hair. The town will talk, she said. A Mexican woman marrying the hermit gunfighter 3 days after showing up shot. Let them talk. It might make things harder. Some people won't do business with you now. The people who matter will. She climbed into bed, and this time, when Clayton joined her, she moved close, resting her head on his shoulder. I don't love you, she said quietly. Not yet, but I think I could, given time. I know, he replied, his arm coming around her carefully. I think I could too. It was honest, more honest than most marriages that began with pretty words and ended in bitter silence. They were building something real from necessity, brick by brick, touch by touch. Clayton? When Thornton comes, because he will come, promise me something. What? If it goes bad, save Sophia. Not me. Sophia, get her to California to my cousin. Promise me. He tightened his arm around her. It won't go bad. Promise me anyway. I promise. But Elena, I've lost one family to violence. I won't lose another. She pressed closer to him, and they lay there in the darkness, two damaged people trying to build something whole. Outside, a screech owl called, and the desert wind whispered secrets through the cottonwoods. The cabin was no longer a hiding place, but a home. No longer a fortress, but a foundation for something that might, despite all odds, grow into the life they'd both stopped believing they deserved. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Thornton was gathering his army, and the reckoning was coming. But tonight, in this bed, in this cabin, with this unexpected family, Clayton Hayes allowed himself to believe in the possibility of redemption, not through isolation and penance, but through the harder path of connection protection and maybe eventually love. The town of Perdition sat in a valley between two mesas, looking exactly like what it was, a place where the railroad had stopped just long enough to spawn a settlement, then moved on, leaving behind those too stubborn, too poor, or too wanted to follow. Main Street was 6 blocks of ambition and failure, with Han Chen's general store anchoring one end and the Babylon Saloon anchoring the other, like virtue and vice, holding the whole enterprise in tension. Clayton drove the wagon with Elena beside him on the bench, Sophia wedged between them. It was their first trip to town as a family 2 weeks after the wedding, and Elena had insisted they go, despite Clayton's reservations. "We hide, we look guilty," she'd said. "We go about our business. We're just another family trying to survive." But Clayton could feel the eyes on them as they rolled down Main Street. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer. Men stepped out of doorways to watch them pass. "Steady," Elena murmured, her hand briefly touching his arm. They stopped first at Chen's store. Han Chen greeted them warmly, loud enough for others to hear. "Mrs. Hayes, how wonderful to see you healing so well. And Sophia Lilly has been asking when you would visit again." The normalcy of it, the deliberate ordinariness, was a small act of rebellion against the town's judgment. Mei Li emerged from the back, immediately fussing over Elena's shoulder, discussing garden plans as if violent men weren't gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. "I need ammunition," Clayton told Chen quietly. "As much as you can spare." Chen nodded, understanding. "I have what you need. Also something else." He produced a letter from beneath the counter. "This came for your wife. From California." Elena's eyes lit up as she recognized the handwriting. Teresa. She tore open the letter, reading quickly, her expression shifting from joy to concern to determination. "What is it?" Clayton asked. "My cousin. She says she received my earlier letter about coming to California. She and her husband are willing to help to take us in. But," she paused, looking at Clayton, "she also says there are men asking about me there. Thornton's reach is longer than we thought." The bell over the door chimed, and the temperature in the store seemed to drop. Moses Craw entered, flanked by 2 men Clayton didn't recognize. New guns, probably the ones Chen had mentioned. "Well, well," Craw said, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who enjoyed his cruelties. "The happy family. How domestic." Sophia pressed closer to Elena, who stood straighter, despite her still healing shoulder. Clayton shifted slightly, positioning himself between them and Craw. "You need something, Moses." Clayton kept his voice level. "Just picking up supplies. Mr. Thornton's having a gathering at his ranch. Lots of guests arriving. Important people. Judges, railroad men, even a territorial marshal." Craw's smile was all teeth. "Funny how the law always seems to side with whoever can afford it. The only thing funny here is you thinking I care about Thornton's parties." Craw stepped closer, close enough that Clayton could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You should care. Mr. Thornton's making it official. He's filing papers, legal papers, for debt collection and—" His eyes slid to Elena. "Recovery of property." "My wife isn't property." "Your wife?" Craw laughed. "A 3-day courtship and a rushed wedding. Any judge would see through that." Elena stepped forward, surprising everyone. Any judge would also see a widow trying to protect herself and her child from men who think violence is negotiation. Or should I show them the bruises, the bullet wound? Would your important guest like to hear about how Marcus Thornton does business? The store had gone completely silent. Even Chen had stopped pretending to work, watching the confrontation. Craw's face darkened. You need to learn when to keep your mouth shut, woman. And you need to learn that I'm not the frightened girl I was 2 weeks ago. Elena replied, I'm Clayton Hayes' wife now. That means something whether you like it or not. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then the door chimed again, and Father Miguel entered. The old priest moved with the careful dignity of age, his presence immediately changing the dynamic. Ah, Mrs. Hayes, he said warmly, as if Craw and his men didn't exist. I was hoping to catch you. We need to discuss the children's Christmas pageant. Sophia would make a wonderful angel, don't you think? The normalcy of it, the assumption of a future where children played angels in Christmas pageants, was quietly devastating to Craw's threats. She would love that, Father, Elena replied, playing along. Mr. Craw. Father Miguel acknowledged his tone cooling considerably. I trust you're not disturbing my parishioners. Just shopping, Padre. Craw stepped back. We'll be going. As they left, Craw paused at the door. This isn't over, Hayes. Mr. Thornton wants what's his, and he always gets it. Tell Thornton if he wants to talk, he knows where to find me. But next time he sends messages, he should come himself instead of sending his dogs. After they left, Father Miguel sighed. You're poking a dangerous bear, my son. Bear was already poked, Father. Now we're just waiting to see who bleeds first. The priest studied Clayton. I remember you, you know, from 5 years ago. You came to confession once in the middle of the night. You spoke of terrible things. Clayton tensed, but Father Miguel raised a hand. What's said in confession stays there, but I want you to know, redemption isn't earned through suffering alone. Sometimes it comes through protecting those who need protection. Sometimes it comes through love. He turned to Elena. Your marriage, rushed as it was, is valid in the eyes of God, if it's valid in your hearts. Is it? Elena looked at Clayton, then back at the priest. It's becoming so, Father. Then I'll include you in Sunday's prayers. All of you. As they continued their shopping, more people approached them. Some were subtle. A nod from the blacksmith, a smile from the schoolteacher. Others were more direct. Sam Rivers, who ran the livery stable, shook Clayton's hand firmly and said, About time someone stood up to that bastard. You need anything, you let me know. But for every ally, there were two who turned away, who whispered behind their hands, who made it clear that associating with the Hayes family was dangerous. They were loading the wagon when a woman approached, elegant despite the dust, wearing a dress that belonged in San Francisco, not Perdition. Clayton recognized her immediately. Victoria Worthington, wife of the English rancher who owned the Double Cross. Mr. Hayes, she said in her clipped British accent. My husband sends his regards. Mr. Bennett spoke highly of you. Ma'am, she turned to Elena, studying her with sharp intelligence. You must be the woman causing such a stir. Good. This town needed stirring. She handed Elena a calling card. I'm having tea on Thursday. You'll come, both of you and Sophia. It wasn't a request. Elena took the card surprised. Mrs. Worthington, I appreciate the invitation, but nothing. The women in this territory need to stand together, or we'll all fall separately. Besides, her smile turned sharp. I do so enjoy irritating the proper ladies who think they run society here. A Mexican woman at my tea. They'll be scandalized. I can hardly wait. As she swept away, Elena looked at the card in wonder. The richest woman in the territory just invited me to tea. Invited us, Clayton corrected, though I'm not sure I'm the tea type. Elena laughed, the first real laugh he'd heard from her, bright and unexpected. Oh, you're going. If I have to face those women, you're facing them with me. The ride home was quieter, each of them processing the trip. Sophia had been mostly silent, observing everything with those watchful eyes. Papa, she said suddenly, the name still new and careful on her lips. Why do some people hate us? Clayton considered his words carefully. People fear what they don't understand, and they hate what they fear. We're different. Your mother and I marrying quick-me, living alone so long, your mother being Mexican. Different scares people. But we're not scary. No, Mia, Elena said softly. We're not. But sometimes being brave looks scary to people who are afraid. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, a rider approached. Clayton recognized him. James Patterson, Elena's cousin's husband from California. The man looked trail-worn, his horse lathered from hard riding. Elena ran out to meet him. James, what are you doing here? Patterson dismounted, accepting water gratefully. Teresa sent me. She's worried. There have been men in Paso Robles asking about you about Sophia. Professional men, if you understand my meaning. Thornton's men, maybe, or bounty hunters. There's paper on you, Elena. Not legal paper, but the kind that men who work outside the law understand. Thornton's offering $5,000 for your return. Clayton whistled low. That was more than most men saw in 5 years. There's more, Patterson continued. I did some digging. This debt Miguel supposedly owed, I found the original paperwork in the territorial records. It was for $300, not $3,000. The rest is fabricated interest and penalties. Can we prove it? Clayton asked. I have copies, but Thornton's got judges in his pocket. Legal proof might not matter. They brought Patterson inside, fed him, gave him a place to rest. As Elena showed him to the barn where he could sleep, Clayton stood on the porch thinking. The net was tightening. Thornton was playing both sides, legal and illegal official and underground. It was how he'd always operated, why he'd been so successful, but it also meant he had more to lose. A man with judges and marshals in his pocket couldn't afford the wrong kind of scandal. Elena joined him on the porch. James says we should run. Tonight. He'll take us to California. Is that what you want? She was quiet for a moment. 2 weeks ago, yes. That's all I wanted. To run, to hide, to disappear somewhere safe. She turned to look at him. But now I have something I didn't have before. What's that? A home. A real home, not just a place to hide, and someone willing to fight for us. She moved closer. I won't run any more, Clayton. Whatever comes, we face it here. It could get bad. Worse than bad. I know. She slipped her hand into his. But for the first time in my life, I'm not facing it alone. That changes everything. That night, as they prepared for bed, Elena said, Tell me about your family. Your real family before the war. Clayton found himself talking, really talking for the first time in years. About his sister Sarah, who could make anyone laugh. About his father's sermons that could move grown men to tears, about his mother's apple pie and how she'd sneak him extra pieces when father wasn't looking. They sound wonderful, Elena said softly. They were, and I failed them all by becoming what I became. No, Elena propped herself up on an elbow looking down at him. You failed them by hiding from what you became, but you're not hiding anymore. She kissed him, then not the brief ceremonial kiss of their wedding, but something deeper, more real. When they pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Elena, we don't have to. I know, but I want to. Not because of the marriage, not because of protection. Because for the first time since I was 16 years old, I actually want to. They came together in the darkness, two wounded souls finding solace in each other's arms. It wasn't the passionate romance of dime novels. It was something quieter, more careful. Two people learning each other's scars, both visible and hidden, and choosing to be gentle with them. Afterward, as Elena slept curled against him, Clayton stared at the ceiling, thinking about community and family, about the threads that were weaving together around them. Chen and his quiet support. Father Miguel and his unexpected blessing. Victoria Worthington and her social rebellion, even Patterson riding all the way from California to warn them they weren't alone anymore. That was both terrifying and wonderful. More people to protect, but also more people standing with them. Thornton had money and guns and legal power, but Clayton was beginning to understand that might not be enough. A war was coming, but for the first time, it wouldn't be fought by a single man seeking redemption through isolation. It would be fought by a family, blood and chosen, traditional and unconventional, bound together by something stronger than law or debt or fear. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance, and its pack answered. Clayton understood the sound differently now. Not loneliness, but belonging. Not isolation, but unity. The crisis would come soon. Thornton wouldn't wait much longer. But tonight, in this bed, in this cabin, with this unexpected family, Clayton Hayes was no longer alone, and that more than any gun or strategy might be what saved them all. The storm came on a Tuesday, but it wasn't made of wind and dust. It was made of men and malice arriving just after dawn, when the desert was painted in shades of rose and gold, too beautiful for what was about to unfold. Clayton was in the barn tending to the horses when Sage suddenly threw his head up, nostrils flaring. The other horses shifted nervously, that particular tension that meant predators were near. Clayton moved to the barn door, peering through a crack, and his blood went cold. They came from 3 directions, 15, maybe 20 men, moving in coordinated formation. Thornton rode at the center on his black stallion, dressed like a man attending a social function rather than a raid. Moses Craw flanked him on one side, and on the other rode someone Clayton hadn't expected, Judge Harrison Blackwood, complete with his traveling court papers. Clayton. Elena's voice urgent but controlled. She was at the cabin window, with Sophia having spotted them too. Clayton grabbed his rifle and pistols, mind racing through options. Too many to fight directly. The legal presence of the judge changed things. This wasn't just a raid, it was an arrest, or meant to look like one. He stepped out of the barn, rifle held casual, but ready. That's close enough, Thornton. The riders stopped at his fence line, spreading out in a semicircle. Thornton smiled, that cold expression Clayton remembered from the old days. Clayton Hayes. It's been too long. Thornton's voice carried that educated Eastern accent he'd never quite shaken, the one that reminded everyone he'd come from money before he'd come west. You look well for a hermit. State your business, or move on. Judge Blackwood urged his horse forward slightly. Mr. Hayes, I'm here on official territorial business. There are questions about the validity of your recent marriage and outstanding debts that must be addressed. My marriage is legal. Bennett filed the papers. Yes, about that. Blackwood produced a document. Mr. Bennett, it seems, allowed his ministerial license to lapse 3 years ago. Any marriages he performed are invalid. Clayton felt the ground shift beneath him. They'd planned this, researched it. That's a lie. I have the territorial records right here. Would you like to examine them? The judge's smile was thin, which means Mrs. Morales, and I use her legal name, has no protection under marriage law. She's a debtor, and Mr. Thornton has legal claim to collect. The debt was $300, Clayton said. Not $3,000. Thornton laughed. Interest, my friend. Penalties. All perfectly legal and documented. Judge Blackwood has reviewed everything. I'm sure he has. How much did that review cost you, Thornton? Several of the hired guns shifted hands, moving to weapons, but Thornton raised a hand, stopping them. Now. No need for unpleasantness. I'm here with a generous offer. The woman and child come with us peacefully, and I'll consider the debt settled through alternative means of payment. The implication in his voice made Clayton's finger move to the trigger guard. Alternatively, Thornton continued, we can do this legally. The judge files the papers. The territorial marshal, who happens to be arriving tomorrow, arrests you for harboring a fugitive debtor, and we take them anyway. You'll hang Clayton, legal and proper. Papa. Sophia's voice small and frightened. She'd stepped onto the porch despite Elena trying to hold her back. The child looked so small, facing all those men, but her chin was raised that same defiant angle as her mother's. Go back inside, mija, Clayton said softly. No. Sophia stepped forward. Mr. Thornton, Why do you hate us so much?" The question, in its childish directness, seemed to catch Thornton off guard. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not quite shame, but perhaps its cousin. "I don't hate you, child. This is business. Mama says business that hurts children isn't business. It's evil." Some of the hired guns shifted uncomfortably. Even hard men had limits, and a 7-year-old girl standing up to them tested those limits. Elena emerged then, and Clayton's heart nearly stopped. She was wearing her best-dressed hair pinned up, looking every inch the lady despite the circumstances. But it was what she held that made everyone freeze. A leather journal, worn and familiar. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Before we discuss debts, perhaps we should discuss this." Thornton's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "My husband was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He knew you might kill him, so he left insurance. This journal contains records of every illegal transaction you've made over the past 3 years. Every bribe, every murder ordered, every claim jumped, all in your own hand." It was a bluff, Clayton realized. It had to be. But Elena sold it perfectly, her face calm and certain. "You're lying," Craw growled. "Am I? Should I read the entry from March 15th about the Vasquez family? Or perhaps April 2nd about the mine inspections that were falsified?" She opened the journal, pretending to read. "Oh, here's an interesting one. Paid Judge Blackwood $500 to ensure guilty verdict in Martinez case." The judge went rigid in his saddle. Several of the hired guns exchanged glances. They'd signed on for debt collection, not to be implicated in larger crimes. "That journal proves nothing," Thornton said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "No. Then you won't mind if I send copies to the territorial governor, to the newspapers in Santa Fe, to your business partners in Chicago, who think you're just a successful rancher." The standoff stretched taut. Clayton could see Thornton calculating, weighing options. Then, horribly, he smiled. "You know what your mistake was, Mrs. Morales. Assuming I care about exposure." He drew his pistol not quickly, but deliberately. "Judge, I believe we're witnessing a case of a debtor resisting lawful collection. Tragic when these things turn violent." Thornton, Blackwood said nervously, "There are other ways." "Shut up, Harrison. You're bought and paid for, so stay bought." Thornton aimed at Elena. "Give me the journal." "No." "I'll kill your daughter." "No," Clayton said, stepping between them. "You'll try." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then thunder rumbled, which was impossible. The sky was clear, but the thunder grew louder, and Clayton realized it wasn't thunder at all. Riders, dozens of them coming fast from the south. As they crested the rise, Clayton saw something he'd never expected. Bennett at the lead beside him, Victoria Worthington herself, and behind them what looked like every hand from the Double Cross Ranch, plus others. Han Chen was there with a group of Chinese workers from the railroad camps. Father Miguel rode with several Mexican vaqueros. Even Sam Rivers from the livery was there. They surrounded Thornton's men, not threatening, but present witnesses to whatever was about to happen. "Marcus," Victoria Worthington said coolly. "Fancy meeting you here." "This is none of your business, Victoria." "Oh, but it is. You see, I've been doing some research of my own. That land you claim, the deeds you've been filing. Quite a lot of it actually belongs to my husband. You've been selling what isn't yours to sell." "You can't prove." "Actually, I can. Amazing what records one can find when one has friends in the territorial capital, friends you haven't bought." Bennett spoke up. "And just so we're clear, my ministerial license is perfectly valid. I renewed it 6 months ago. Have the papers right here if anyone wants to see them." The judge was sweating now, realizing he'd been caught in something bigger than he'd anticipated. "This doesn't change the debt," Thornton said, but he was losing control of the situation. "About that," Father Miguel said, "I've been going through the church records. Miguel Morales' confession given on his deathbed. He spoke of you, Senor Thornton. of how you forced him to sign papers while drunk, threatened his family if he didn't take your loans. The seal of confession is sacred, but a dying man's testimony about crimes, that's different. Thornton's men were getting nervous now. They'd signed on for easy money, not a standoff with half the territory's prominent citizens. Then Clayton heard something else, horses approaching from the north. His heart sank. More of Thornton's men, but the riders who appeared wore badges. Real badges, a U.S. Marshal and 3 deputies dust-covered from hard riding. Marshal Thompson, Thornton said, confidence returning. Just in time. I need you to arrest Marcus Thornton. The marshal interrupted. You're under arrest for mail fraud, interstate trafficking of stolen goods, and conspiracy to commit murder. The silence that followed was absolute. That's impossible. I work for the federal government, Thompson said. And they've been very interested in your operations since you started stealing from the mail service to intercept legal documents. That's a federal crime, Thornton. This is Hayes's doing. No, Elena said quietly. This is James Patterson's doing, my cousin's husband, the one you sent men after in California. He's also a Pinkerton detective, has been investigating you for 2 years. Patterson emerged from behind the barn where he'd been hidden, badge visible now. The journal's real, by the way, he said. Miguel gave it to Father Miguel before he died to be given to Elena if anything happened to him. We've had it authenticated. Your handwriting, your crimes, all admissible in federal court. Thornton's face went from pale to red to purple. You bitch, you planned this. He raised his gun toward Elena, and several things happened at once. Clayton moved faster than he'd moved in years. Moses Craw went for his weapon. Bennett's rifle came up. Victoria Worthington, of all people, pulled a Derringer from her sleeve. The gunshot was singular clean. Thornton looked down at the spreading red stain on his vest, surprise replacing rage on his face. He turned to see who'd shot him. It was Sophia holding Clayton's spare pistol, the one he'd been teaching her to clean, the one he thought wasn't loaded. Her small hands shook, but her aim had been true. You threatened my mama, she said simply. Thornton fell from his horse, gasping. The marshal was already moving, kicking away his gun, checking the wound. He'll live, Thompson announced, but he'll stand trial. Craw and several others tried to run, but they were surrounded. Some surrendered immediately. Craw tried to fight and was clubbed down by Sam Rivers with a shovel. That's for burning my first stable, you son of a bitch. As the marshals rounded up Thornton's men, Clayton knelt beside Sophia, who had dropped the gun and was shaking. I didn't mean to, she whispered. He was going to hurt Mama again. You protected your family, Clayton said softly. Sometimes that's all we can do. Elena wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stayed like that while chaos swirled around them. Arrests being made, statements being taken, a community that had finally said enough surrounding them with protection. Later, as the sun set and the dust settled, their yard was full of people. May Lee and the other women had somehow produced food. Someone had brought out a fiddle. What had started as a crisis had transformed into a celebration. You knew, Clayton said to Elena. You knew Patterson was Pinkerton. I suspected. Teresa's letters were too careful, too vague. And when James showed up, he asked questions that weren't cousin questions. She smiled. But I didn't know about the journal until yesterday. Father Miguel brought it, said Miguel had confessed everything before he died, wanting to protect us. And Victoria Worthington. That was Bennett. He told her what happened here, and she decided Thornton had gotten too big for his boots. She's the one who contacted the federal marshals. Clayton looked around at their yard full of allies, people who'd risked themselves for strangers who'd become family. We could have died today. We could have, Elena agreed, but we didn't, because we weren't alone. Judge Blackwood was being led away in chains. Thornton was on his way to federal prison, and the sun was setting on what felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. Sophia tugged on Clayton's sleeve. Papa, I'm sorry I took your gun. We'll talk about that later. For now, just remember, protecting family is noble, but killing leaves marks on your soul that never fade. Like yours, like mine. Sophia considered this with that serious expression. Then we'll carry our marks together. The celebration went on into the night. Stories were told, bonds were strengthened, and a community that had been fractured by fear began to heal. The crisis had passed, but its resolution had changed everything. The territory would remember this day not as when Marcus Thornton fell, but as when ordinary people stood together and refused to be afraid anymore. As the last guests left and quiet returned to their cabin, the Hayes family, for that's what they truly were now, sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be trials testimony, the slow work of rebuilding what Thornton had destroyed. But tonight, they were safe. They were together, and they were home. The trial lasted 3 weeks in Santa Fe. Clayton had never spent so much time indoors, sitting on hard benches, listening to lawyers argue about things that seemed both crucially important and absurdly distant from the reality of what had happened. Elena testified with quiet dignity. Sophia was spared that ordeal due to her age, and Clayton found himself on the stand for 2 full days, recounting not just recent events, but his history with Thornton. "You were one of his men," the prosecutor said. "Tell the court about the Messia incident." Clayton had known this was coming. In the gallery, Elena watched him with steady eyes, giving him strength. "I killed a family on Thornton's orders," he said clearly. "A woman, 3 children, an elderly grandmother, January 15th, 1877. Thornton said they were revolutionaries. They weren't. They were just a family having dinner." The courtroom murmured. The defense attorney stood to object, but the judge, a real judge this time brought in from Washington, overruled him. The witness is providing context for the defendant's pattern of behavior. Clayton continued each word feeling like a stone lifted from his chest. "I left Thornton that night. He let me go because he knew the guilt would be worse than any bullet. And yet you protected his latest victims. Because I couldn't save that family in Messia, but I could save this one." When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts life in federal prison, Thornton had to be restrained. As they let him out, he turned to Clayton. "This isn't over, Hayes. I have friends. I have money hidden." "You have nothing," Clayton interrupted. "Your assets are seized. Your men scattered or jailed. Your empire is dust. You're just another criminal, now heading to a cell you'll die in." Thornton's face contorted with rage, but then something worse flickered across it. Fear. The understanding that his story was over, that all his cruelty had led only to a cage. They returned to perdition to find the town transformed. Without Thornton's shadow looming over it, people walked straighter, talked louder, dreamed bigger. The Chinese workers who'd been confined to the edge of town began opening businesses on Main Street. The Mexican families who'd been systematically cheated started reclaiming their lands through proper legal channels. But the biggest change was at their own ranch. Clayton stood at the gate staring. Their small cabin was surrounded by construction. New rooms were being added, a proper barn was half built, and people, dozens of them, were working everywhere. "What is this?" he asked Elena. She smiled, that mysterious smile he was still learning to read. "While you were testifying, I was planning. We're going to need more room." "For what?" "For the school." Clayton turned to stare at her. "School? The town needs one. A real one, not just Sunday lessons at the church. I've been talking to Mrs. Worthington and May Lee. We're going to teach all the children, white, Mexican, Chinese, Apache, if they'll come. Together." "Elena, that's necessary. Education is the only thing that really changes the world, Clayton. You know that." He thought of his mother teaching in their kitchen in Tennessee, believing knowledge was sacred. The town won't all accept it. Mixed races in one school. Then we'll start with those who will. The rest will come around, or their children will grow up ignorant. Their choice. Will Henley approached carrying lumber. He'd stayed after the trial, claiming he had nowhere else to go, But Clayton suspected it had more to do with the way he looked at Margaret Bennett, who'd also remained in perdition. "Mr. Hayes, where do you want the additional windows for the classroom?" "Classroom's south wall." Elena answered for him. Children need light to learn. Over the following weeks, Clayton watched his isolated cabin transform into something unrecognizable. The school building rose beside their expanded home. A proper garden spread where desert had been, with an ingenious irrigation system designed by Han Chen's brother. The chicken coop became a small barn with milk cows and goats. Sophia thrived in the chaos, organizing the other children who came to help her, English and Spanish flowing together as she translated between workers. The gunshot she'd fired had marked her. There was something more serious in her eyes now, but she seemed to have made peace with it in the way children can when surrounded by love and purpose. One evening, Clayton found her in the new library room, carefully arranging books that had been donated from across the territory. "Papa," she said without looking up, "do you think Mr. Thornton was always bad?" Clayton sat beside her on the floor. "No, Misha. I think he was probably a boy, once maybe even a good one. But he made choices, each one a little worse than the last, until being bad was all he knew how to be." "Could that happen to me because I shot him?" "No, because you have something he never had." "What?" "People who love you enough to keep you good." She leaned against him, and they sat quietly sorting books while the sun set through the new windows. The school opened in September, 6 months after Thornton's arrest. 43 children showed up the first day, overwhelming their expectations. Elena stood at the front of the classroom, nervous but determined, while Clayton and the other men had built extra benches in the yard. "Welcome," Elena said in English, then repeated it in Spanish, and looked to Lily Chen, who translated into Mandarin. "This is a place where everyone learns, everyone matters, and everyone has a chance to become more than what the world expects them to be." Margaret Bennett had agreed to teach arithmetic and geography. Father Miguel offered to teach history and ethics. Even Victoria Worthington came once a week to teach what she called proper English and improper thinking. Clayton found his own role unexpectedly. The older boys, especially the ones headed toward the kind of trouble he'd once embraced, gravitated toward him. He taught them to work with horses, to build with their hands, but mostly he taught them what he'd learned too late. That strength without conscience was just another form of weakness. One day, Thomas Brennan, a 15-year-old with too much anger and nowhere to put it, asked him, "Mr. Hayes, how do you stop being angry all the time?" Clayton was mucking out stalls, and he paused, leaning on the pitchfork. "You don't stop being angry, son. You just learn to point it at things worth being angry about. Injustice, cruelty, ignorance. Then you use that anger to build something better." "But what if you've already done bad things?" Clayton looked at the boy, seeing himself at that age full of rage and looking for a target. "Then you do good things, not to erase the bad, but to outnumber it. Eventually, if you're lucky and you work hard enough, the good becomes who you are." "Is that what you did?" Clayton thought about it, then nodded slowly. "It's what I'm trying to do." The transformation wasn't just in their ranch. Perdition itself was changing. The Babylon Saloon still did good business, but now there was also a lending library, a proper school, and plans for a town hall where decisions would be made by vote rather than by whoever had the most guns. Moses Craw had escaped during transport to prison, and there were rumors he was gathering Thornton's scattered men, but those were problems for another day. For now, there was building to do. One night, as autumn turned the cottonwoods gold, Clayton and Elena sat on their porch watching the sunset. The school day was done, children's voices fading into the distance, and a blessed quiet settled over their land. "Do you regret it?" Elena asked. "The life you had before." "The solitude," Clayton considered. "I thought silence was peace. Turns out it was just empty. This," he gestured at their transformed home, the garden, the school, the evidence of community everywhere. This is harder, louder, more complicated, but it's also alive. The territory newspaper wants to do a story about the school about us. The headline would be, From Gunfighter to Schoolmaster. Clayton snorted. I'm no schoolmaster. I shovel horse manure and try to keep teenage boys from killing each other or themselves. That sounds exactly like a schoolmaster to me. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Elena said, I'm pregnant. The words hit Clayton like a physical blow. He turned to stare at her, and she was smiling, nervous, and hopeful. Is it? The doctor says I'm healthy. The baby should come in spring. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. A new life, Clayton. A child who'll never know the fear Sophia knew. Who'll grow up in a world we're building, not one we're surviving. Clayton found himself unable to speak. A father, not just to Sophia, whom he'd come to love as his own, but to a baby, a new life created not from violence or desperation, but from love. Say something, Elena said nervously. I need to build a crib, and a rocking chair, and maybe expand the house again. And Elena laughed, pulling him close. We have time. Spring is months away. Not enough time. Not nearly enough. He kissed her forehead, then knelt and kissed her stomach, whispering, Hello, little one. I'm your father. I promise I'll do better for you than I've done for myself. That night, as they lay in bed, Clayton felt something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd forgotten its name. Not just hope, but joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the thought of tomorrow. The past wasn't erased. The family in Messia still visited his dreams, but now they stood at a distance, watching rather than accusing. Sometimes he imagined he saw approval in the grandmother's ghostly eyes, as if his work here, his protection of this family, his building of this community, was slowly balancing the cosmic scales. Clayton, Elena whispered in the darkness. What do you want to name the baby? He thought about it. If it's a boy, Miguel, after your first husband, he deserves to be remembered for trying to protect you, even if he failed. And if it's a girl, Esperanza, hope. Like you said that first night, every child deserves a name, and hope is what she'll be. Elena curled closer to him. I love you. I know I said I couldn't at first, but I do now. Completely. I love you too. More than I thought I was capable of. Outside, an owl called, and the desert wind played its ancient song through the cottonwoods. Their ranch, no longer just a cabin but a compound of buildings, dreams, and purposes, stood as testament to what could be built from ashes. The school would open again. Tomorrow, children would come to learn. The community would continue to heal and grow. The gunfighter was not dead, could never fully die. Clayton still wore his pistol, still practiced at dawn, still watched the horizon for trouble. But he was transformed, no longer defined by violence, but by what he protected, what he built, what he loved. The territory was still hard, still dangerous. Moses Craw was still out there, and there would be other threats. But now, Clayton Hayes was not a lone man standing against the darkness. He was part of something larger, a family, a community, a future being written one day at a time. And in the spring, new life would come born into a world made better by sacrifice, courage, and the radical act of choosing love over fear. The desert would bloom, as it always did, after the rains, and the Hayes Ranch would continue its transformation from a place of hiding to a beacon of hope. Redemption, Clayton had learned, wasn't a destination. It was a journey measured not in miles, but in moments. Each kindness, each lesson taught each child protected each day of choosing to build rather than destroy. And he would walk that road for the rest of his days, no longer alone, but surrounded by the family he'd never expected and the community he'd helped to save. Spring came to the desert like a miracle that year, with more rain than anyone could remember. The usually brown landscape exploded in color. Purple lupines, golden poppies, pink fairy dusters, creating a carpet of life where before there had been only survival. It was April 15th, 1883, exactly 1 year, since Clayton had found Elena bleeding in the wash, and the Hayes Ranch was preparing for 2 celebrations. The first was the wedding, a real wedding this time with flowers and music and half the territory in attendance. The second, known only to a few, was the impending birth of their child. Elena was enormous, radiant, moving through the preparations with the deliberate grace of a woman carrying precious cargo. "You should be resting," Clayton said for the 100th time, watching her direct the placement of tables in their yard. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Elena replied, then softened it with a smile. "The baby will come when it comes. Today is about something else." The something else was remarkable. What had begun as a simple renewal of vows had transformed into a community celebration. Every family was bringing food. The Chinese workers had constructed a beautiful arbor woven with desert willows. The Mexican families had created paper flowers in every color imaginable. Even the Apache, who rarely came to town, had sent gifts: a cradle board for the coming baby, and a wedding blanket that must have taken months to weave. Sophia, now 8 and several inches taller, was directing the younger children in hanging decorations. She moved with authority, translating between languages, solving disputes with a fairness that reminded Clayton of Elena. "Papa," she called out, "where should we put the musicians?" Clayton looked at his daughter, for that's what she was, blood or no blood, and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. She'd grown so much, not just in height, but in spirit. The haunted child he'd found clinging to her dying mother had become a leader, a bridge between communities. "Under the big cottonwood," he answered. "The acoustics are better there." Margaret Bennett, now Margaret Henley, having married Will in a quiet ceremony 6 months ago, approached with a ledger. "Clayton, we've got over 200 people confirmed coming." "That's half the territory." "That's impossible. We don't know that many people." "You do now. Word spread about what happened here, about the school, about the stand against Thornton. People want to be part of it." Victoria Worthington swept up an address that probably cost more than most people's houses. "Clayton dear, I've brought champagne from France. Don't look at me like that. Every wedding needs proper toasting." "This isn't exactly a society wedding, Victoria." "No, it's better. It's real." She looked around at the controlled chaos of preparation. "Do you know what you've done here? You've proved that change is possible, that the territory doesn't have to be ruled by the strongest gun or the deepest pocket. That's worth more than all the champagne in France." Father Miguel arrived with his vestments and a worn Bible. "Are you ready for this, my son?" "I thought I was ready the first time." "That was necessity. This is choice. God smiles more on the second than the first." As the sun began its descent toward the mesa, guests started arriving. They came in wagons and on horseback, families who would never have mixed a year ago, now greeting each other like neighbors. The yard filled with languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, even some Apache and Navajo. Children ran between the adults playing games that needed no translation. Han Chin pulled Clayton aside. "There's something you should know. Moses Crawl was seen in Albuquerque last week. He's gathered maybe a dozen men." Clayton's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Coming this way. Unknown, but Patterson's keeping watch. He's got men stationed on the roads." Clayton nodded, filing the information away. Not today, he thought. Let us have this one day. As sunset approached, everyone gathered. Elena emerged from the house in a dress of cream and gold that Mei Lee and the other women had spent weeks creating. Her belly was round and proud beneath the fabric, and she'd never looked more beautiful. Sophia walked beside her, wearing a matching smaller dress carrying wildflowers. Clayton stood at the arbor in his best suit, actually new, not just his cleanest old clothes. Will stood beside him as best man, nervously adjusting his string tie. The crowd fell silent as Elena approached, and Clayton felt that same tightness in his chest he'd felt a year ago, but different now. Then it had been desperation and duty. Now it was love, pure and simple. Father Miguel began the ceremony, his voice carrying across the gathering. We come together today, not to create a union, but to celebrate one that has been forged in fire, tested by violence, and strengthened by love. As they exchanged vows, real vows this time, words they'd written themselves, Clayton was aware of the crowd, but focused only on Elena. "A year ago, I was a dead man, walking," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had isolated myself so completely that I'd forgotten what it meant to be human. You brought me back. You, Sophia, this community. You all brought me back. I promise to spend whatever days God grants me earning the faith you've placed in me." Elena's eyes shimmered with tears. "You gave us sanctuary when the world wanted to destroy us. You stood between us and evil, not because you had to, but because it was right. You taught me that love isn't just about feeling safe, but about having someone worth being brave for. I promise to stand beside you, to build with you, to create a world where our children never know the fear we knew." As Father Miguel pronounced them husband and wife, again, but meaningfully now, the crowd erupted in celebration. Music started, a mixture of Mexican guitars, a Chinese erhu, and a frontier fiddle, creating something entirely new. Tables groaned under the weight of food from a dozen traditions. Children danced with adults. Cultural boundaries dissolved in joy. Clayton was watching Elena dance with Sophia when she suddenly stopped, her face changing. "Elena, I think the baby." The celebration paused as Elena gripped Clayton's arm, her face tight with pain. The women immediately took charge, ushering Elena inside, while the men stood around uncertainly. Clayton tried to follow, but Mei Lee stopped him. "This is women's work now. You wait." And so he waited, pacing the porch, while inside his wife labored to bring new life into the world. The party continued subdued, but present the community, understanding that birth and celebration were not separate, but part of the same continuity. Hours passed. The moon rose full and bright. Sophia sat beside Clayton on the porch steps, leaning against him. "Are you scared, Papa?" "Terrified. Mama says being scared for the right reasons is just another kind of love." Before Clayton could respond, a cry pierced the night, not of pain, but of life, new and insistent. Margaret appeared at the door, grinning. "It's a girl, healthy and loud and perfect." Clayton rushed inside to find Elena propped up in bed, exhausted, but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled and absolutely beautiful. "Esperanza," Elena whispered. "Hope." Clayton took his daughter, his second daughter, in his arms, and she opened her eyes. They were unfocused, as all newborn eyes are, but he swore she looked right at him, right through him, seeing not his past, but his future. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world we're building for you." The community celebrated until dawn, toasting the new baby, the renewed marriage, the future they were all creating together. As the sun rose, painting the desert in gold and rose, Clayton stood on his porch, looking out at his land, their land. The school building stood proud in the morning light. The garden was green with spring growth. The expanded house rang with the sounds of family. Elena singing softly to Esperanza Sophia, reading aloud from a book, The Everyday Miracle of Domestic Life. James Patterson rode up dusty from the road. "Craw's gang broke up," he reported. "Seems they heard about the celebration, about how many people would be here. Decided it wasn't worth it. Last report has Craw heading for Mexico, running from federal warrants." Clayton nodded, feeling the last weight of immediate threat lifting. There would be other challenges, other troubles, but not today. Maybe not for a long while. "Stay for breakfast," Clayton offered. "Don't mind if I do." As they walked inside, Clayton paused, looking back at the desert. The morning light illuminated the whole valley, showing the town of Perdition. In the distance, the roads connecting ranch to ranch, the threads of community that had been woven over the past year. This was what redemption looked like, he realized. Not a single moment of forgiveness, but 1,000 small acts of building. Not isolation and penance, but connection and growth. The ghosts of Messiah would always be with him, but they stood now as reminders rather than accusers, witnesses to his transformation from destroyer to protector, from loner to family man, from gunfighter to teacher and father. Inside, Elena was nursing Esperanza, while Sophia helped set the table. The house smelled of coffee and fresh bread, of home and possibility. Through the window, Clayton could see children already arriving for school, their voices carrying on the morning air. "Clayton," Elena called. "Food's ready." He went inside to join his family, his wife, his daughters, his friend, his community. The gunfighter was still there, would always be there, ready if needed, but he was wrapped now in layers of love and purpose, transformed from weapon to guardian. The desert bloomed around them, proof that even the harshest ground could bring forth life if given water and care. The Hayes Ranch stood as testament to that truth, that broken people could heal, that communities could unite across differences, that love could grow from the rockiest soil. As Clayton held his newborn daughter, while his older daughter read to them, and his wife prepared breakfast, he thought about the long journey from that night in the wash to this morning of promise. Every step had been necessary. The pain, the fear, the courage, the choice to stand rather than run, to build rather than hide. The West was still wild, still dangerous. But here, in this corner of the New Mexico territory, something new was growing. A place where Mexican and Anglo and Chinese and Apache children learned together, where a gunfighter could become a teacher, where a beaten woman could become a community leader, where an orphan could find a father and a home. This was the true taming of the West, not through violence or dominance, but through the patient work of building something worth protecting. Through choosing love over fear, community over isolation, hope over despair. Clayton Hayes had come to the desert to die slowly alone with his guilt. Instead, he'd learned to live surrounded by family and purpose. The angel of death had become an angel of life, midwifing not just his own redemption, but the transformation of an entire community. As the sun climbed higher and the day began in earnest, with all its ordinary miracles and small victories, Clayton knew that this was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The desert sang its ancient song of endurance and renewal, and the Hayes family, all four of them now, were part of that song, their voices joining the eternal chorus of those who choose to build rather than destroy, to love rather than fear, to hope rather than despair, and in that choice, repeated daily, lived the true victory, not over men like Thornton or Craw, but over the darkness that lurked in every human heart, waiting to devour or to be transformed into light. The story would continue, as all true stories do, beyond this ending, into new challenges and victories. But this moment, this morning of new life and renewed love of community and possibility, this was the moment that would define all that came after. Hope had been born literally and figuratively in the desert. And, like all desert blooms, it would be hardy, resilient, and impossibly beautiful.